I'm Basia Sokolowska and I'm taking you through my creative alphabet. Today is G for Georgia. Georgia O'Keeffe, of course, a great American artist, a free spirit, a very strong personality, someone whose art and life serves as inspiration and a source of beauty and delight for many, many generations. Georgia's work is very inspiring on many levels for me. There is one level which was pointed out to me quite early when I wasn't aware of Georgia's work as intimately as I am now, which was the sensuality of her early works, the sensuality of her flower paintings. Someone referred to them while looking at my Ars Moriendi series of photographs. I talked about them in one of the earliest episodes of my creative alphabet, so you can find out more about it. Well, sensuality is definitely something that I can relate to in terms of the imagery I make and Georgia O'Keeffe's works. But I find her sensuality stretching well beyond her early works and her flower paintings. I find her responding in a very, very direct and sensual and intimate way to the landscape that surrounds her. And that's also something that I find very interesting in Georgia's work and something that resonates within me quite deeply. She was very strong and independent and dedicated to her art more than anything else. That was a very important thing for her. And she prioritized it over her personal life. And in that way, she was quite unusual, as many women artists of her generation didn't have that strength and independence, that privilege given to one's art practice was reserved for many generations to men, and women, if they made art, it was very often regarded as a very secondary activity to her main role as wives and mothers. I'm talking about married women, of course. Georgia moved to New Mexico, leaving Alfred Stieglitz behind on the East Coast, and spent summers there first and then moved there. And that was a very, very bold gesture, but also it shows how deeply connected she was with the landscape and how much she loved the grand open spaces of New Mexico that made her way into her paintings and her drawings. She treated landscape as a very, very immediate environment, which is reflected in the design of her houses in New Mexico, with huge windows looking out on the landscape, but also the way she worked in the landscape. She made her paintings from nature, painting in the very, very hostile climate of New Mexico. When she was painting outside, in the heat of the day, she quite often rested under her car because that was the coolest place in the whole area where she painted. And it shows that she related to this landscape in a very different way that most people today relate to it, and treated it as a kind of natural thing that has all the harshness and inconveniences as well as grand beauty, which in some ways is contingent upon it, upon the difficulties. And it's very different to the way we today experience landscape, moving through it in air-conditioned cars, with listening to the music with the windows shut, in a sort of like a capsule of comfort and our everyday habits, rather than opening up to it and experiencing it on its own terms. I like to experience landscape the same way as Georgia O'Keeffe did, and it affects me in a very, very profound way, in a way that the city environment where I live does not. And it doesn't really matter where I am in the world. The nature, natural open spaces really did affect me in a very profound emotional, sort of soothing, but also spiritual way. My probably first contact with grand open spaces was in Australia in the late 80s. It was before I became a photographer or an artist. I spent some time in the country, in the outback in Australia, and took photographs there, not as part of an art project, but photographs of the landscape as a way of coming to terms with it, because coming from Europe, it was a very, very different experience, very strange, unfamiliar, in some ways hostile, but also a way of recording its beauty, responding to its beauty. Photography is actually a very good way of responding to something we see and we want to um, remember, record, or process. This is one of the images of my Orana series of landscapes, and I chose it because it has blue, very blue, big sky, and also it has dead trees, gum trees. I surrounded these photographs, these images, with text, sort of, which was my personal reflections on this particular aspect of the environment, of the landscape that I photographed. And here I talk about the problem of salinity and the degradation of the Australian soil, which was a problem in the 80s and still is. It was sort of my environmental concern in the days before the environment became such a big problem in the world. So this is something quite unusual in my photography. I don't photograph landscape very much. There are two places where I am drawn to the landscape in a way I photograph it. And my photography is not really about trying to take a picture of a beautiful sunset, of something stunning, something that will impress the viewers. My landscapes are quite personal, and they are, as I said, a way of honoring the place and soaking in its beauty with all the sensory aspects that I can experience. So I think that aspect, the relationship with the landscape and the way I respond to it as a person, because I don't really draw landscapes or photograph landscapes. I'm rather focusing on some aspects of landscapes, such as stones and shells and plants. But I think that I share the same sensibility to landscape, and that's why Georgia O'Keeffe's landscapes resonate with me so much. There is another aspect of Georgia O'Keeffe's biography that influenced my life, and it is her love for chow chows that she had while she was living in New Mexico. And it was by her inspiration that I also acquired a Chow Chow, who became a very important companion and being in my life.